Talking to Alicia the other night and told her about meeting a guy named Leroy Garrett, and figured I'd make a video about that because I've never publicized that meeting with him. But anyway, he is a guy who was a historian and a restoration movement radical, I guess is the best way to put it. And I met him in the year 2000 over in Montgomery, Alabama, when I was um, finishing my thesis for my master's degree and fellowshipping over at Landmark Church of Christ. And he was coming as a guest speaker, and I was using some of his history books as my research material, and because he's kind of like one of the definitive history writers for the Churches of Christ, which is the fellowship I grew up in. And Leroy was going to be speaking that night, and before the meeting, I was invited to come meet him face to face because I had expressed interest in doing that. And here's this big church with all the big wig elders, and they were coming in, and Leroy's probably about maybe 80 at this time, and so he's the old man, and I'm the young man coming in there, uh, and not still not even 30 yet, and so I was anxious to hear what he had to say, and he ended up doing a sermon on Ecclesiastes that day. But the meeting with him in private was the fun part. And before the elders meeting started, and I wasn't part of the elders meeting, but when all the elders started gathering, he pulled me to the side and said, I've got a word that I want to share with you, and I want to share with you the word that he shared with me, because part of Leroy's history was back in the, I guess, 60s, maybe 50s even. He had gone off to college, and he was a Church of Christ kid and went off to Harvard, and was studying up there. And he, like one of his contemporaries, who is long past now, um, Carl Ketcherside, were labeled as radicals because of their view of unity within the churches of Christ, because their teaching was that unity came from Christ himself and not our wranglings of doctrine, which is kind of where I am on the whole thing. That it flows from Christ, not from what you believe about it. So anyway, Leroy came back to Freed-Hardeman University and was arrested for disturbing the peace when they asked him to stop his radical teachings. He migrated back to the dorm where he was sleeping for the night. And when the young college guys kept asking him about this strange new teaching that he had, he didn't stay silent. So they had him arrested. And so that's kind of an interesting radical story of American born religion, like the Restoration Movement is was. And Leroy's a really cool character in that history. He never stepped away from the fellowship of Church of Christ, even though he was labeled as a radical. And a lot of people said that he's not one of us. And it was a pleasure meeting him because of his attitude of because I kind of feel like I'm in the same place as Leroy Garrett, in that when your beliefs make you be a person who you knowingly are away from the flock that you grew up in. What do you do? And you don't say I'm not one of them, which I haven't ever done. But I feel a lot of tension from family and friends, and it's a sensitive situation because it's people's belief systems. But felt like I was a good boy and read my Bible and did my studies, and when you come to a different conclusion, what are you supposed to do? And then you're a preacher for pay, and then you don't have a job anymore because you can't find a church that'll let you share your teachings. And it's kind of that's been my story, and it's been hard. So with all that in mind, this is what Leroy said to me. He said, turn to the book of Hebrews 11, and you hear the stories of all the people who by faith did something or another. And the first part of the story is really positive stuff of it's basically by faith this person achieved awesomeness, and by faith this person was at the heights of awesomeness, and then there's a shift. And that's what Leroy impressed upon me, was that the shift that happens is the same chapter as all the awesomeness. And so, what does it mean that we will suffer for our faith? Or what does it mean that to follow Christ we have to be crucified? And I think this is the fleshing out of that, because by faith sometimes it's not an awesome story. By faith sometimes you end up exiled and outside of your flock of comfort. So anyway, you read, let's see, verse 32. He says, "What more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms," which is awesome, "enforced justice," which is awesome, "obtained promises," which is great, "stopped the mouths of lions," awesome, "quenched the power of fire," awesome, "escaped the edge of the sword," super awesome, "were made strong out of weakness," oh, that's very awesome, "became mighty in war," that's mighty, "put foreign armies to flight," awesome, "women received back their dead by resurrection," super awesome. Then there's a shift. There's still awesomeness. It's still all by faith. And he keeps reading. "Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth." So even those terrible things are included in the awesomeness. And that's my take home of the story of meeting Leroy Garrett, was that he kind of threw that passage upon me, and it's not it's not like a blessing, is it? But it is a blessing because it's following in the paths of Christ, and there will be sufferings, there will be death, and I hadn't gone anywhere near that kind of suffering. And I think we as American Christians, we tend to want the awesomeness. We kind of would like to have that prosperity gospel as is commonly preached. We would like that to be true, but there is the suffering side of following Christ, which is it's a non-negotiable. And I think maybe if the suffering is not there, it might be that the following might not be where you want it to either. So anyway, I want to stop this video at 10 minutes, no editing, and put it out there to see if anybody wants to see about the story about me meeting Leroy Garrett.